We're going to keep moving forward in the agenda. You've heard from her before once or twice, actually 2 or 3 times, might even be 3 or 4 now. My goodness, we went from 1 to 4. A member of this community, an expert speaker who continues to deliver all the time. Just kind of our honor to welcome her back. Folks who are in the room innovating and leading their projects, this next segment is critical for you. And I mean that as a pun. This is Critical Thinking for Leaders with Michèle. Michèle, good to see you. Welcome back into the Innovators Think Tank. Let me give you the mic and let's dig into the topic today. What are we talking about? Why does it matter to you? And then let's go ahead and get cruising. I'll give you the mic, and so good to see you. Welcome back in.
Hey Josh, thank you so much. I will say I think you should have let me go first because I have no idea how I'm going to follow this incredible segment from Dr. Sarah Matt. I took so many notes, and I'm just kind of in awe to share a stage with her because I am kind of at the beginning of my career and really just going into a brand new field right now, starting to explore cognitive science, starting to study a lot of new things about how the brain works and how we think. And yes, I definitely don't have her level of expertise, but I'm going to do my best to give you guys a good segment today, hopefully spark some interesting discussions. And really, the reason that I think critical thinking is so important is because in this day and age, we are giving it less attention than we should. We are starting to rely a lot on the tools that we are using. We're starting to outsource a lot of our thinking. And especially since it has now become so easy for us to start using AI, to start using all of the resources available, we're actually thinking a lot less than we used to. So in this talk today, I want to discuss critical thinking, what that looks like for leaders especially. And I want to also say that everybody here listening to the I.T.T on a Saturday is already a leader. I'm not talking only about the president and your boss. I mean, if you are here innovating, you're definitely somebody who thinks outside the box. You don't follow the beaten path because you forge your own path. But with that said, I do also want you to take a moment to ask yourself why I did choose leaders specifically for this conversation about critical thinking, because you might argue that this is probably a skill that everybody should have. So to get into it, I'm going to start by first discussing what leadership actually is. And leadership is the ability to define a clear direction or a future state, and to also inspire other people to pursue that state. So it's less about authority, and it's really more about influencing other people's thoughts, other people's behaviors, and the decisions that they make towards moving towards a shared goal. So in so many ways, leaders help us to make sense of the world. They interpret the complexity, they provide direction when the environment feels chaotic or when things are really ambiguous. And in so many ways, leaders also shape the future because their decisions ripple across time and they affect many more people beyond themselves. And when we don't have enough information to know what to do, we tend to look to leaders for guidance. We look to them for safety and we look to them for reassurance. So we place a lot of trust in leaders because we expect that they have our best interests at heart. And I mean that both from a moral perspective, but also that they are intelligent, they are qualified, and they're actually capable of making the right decisions. So it's important to remember that nobody is actually born with all of the answers. And throughout history, human beings have pursued knowledge through science and through experimentation. And in passing on this knowledge, we also allow other people to take it one step further, to look at it from new angles and to discover new things. And all of this requires critical thinking. So, what exactly is critical thinking? I'm going to give you guys a high level definition. Critical thinking is the disciplined use of reason to evaluate information, to test assumptions, and to form judgments that are both logically coherent and also anchored in reality. It requires not just generating thoughts, but actively examining them as well, asking where they came from, whether they are supported by evidence, and how they connect to what is already known. So I've heard an argument a lot lately that we don't really need memory because at this point in time, we have the internet and we can just look up whatever it is that we don't know. And there's actually something called the Google effect, which says that you're less likely to remember information if you expect that you'll easily be able to find it again. But memory is actually more essential than you might realize because thinking doesn't happen in a vacuum. It operates more on stored knowledge. And without that memory, there wouldn't be any continuity of thought. There would be no way to compare present claims against past knowledge. There would be no capacity to recognize patterns or contradictions or errors that keep coming up again and again. So original thinking depends on this mental archive. It actually pulls from relevant experiences, it pulls from facts and from models, and it holds them in your working memory basically long enough to test them against new inputs. So basically, in other words, memory provides the raw material and critical thinking is the process that shapes it into reliable knowledge and sound judgment. And by connecting ideas from different disciplines, a little like she mentioned earlier, you are also able to synthesize information in new ways, and you're able to contribute meaningfully to the world. So especially for leaders, deep thinking is so important because it's the art of questioning assumptions. It's the art of evaluating that evidence and resisting those easy narratives that are right in front of you that would be so easy to just grab onto. And with all of this happening, leaders face a lot of noise. We are swimming in bias and we're swimming in persuasion, and they need to know how to filter the truth from the deception, how to separate the signal from the noise. Because unlike everyday choices, leadership decisions carry these long-term systemic consequences that impact so many people. And so you need to have careful reasoning. You can't just be acting impulsively on the first thing that comes to mind. But also, as the world keeps shifting, good leaders should be able to revise these mental models and they should be able to adapt to the changes. Because after all, followers trust leaders who can explain not just what they decided, but also why, especially in terms that they can easily understand. So at this point, I'm assuming that you're all pretty sold on the importance of critical thinking. And so I'd really like to talk about what actually gets in the way. Why aren't we all just doing this by default all the time? But with where we are at right now, technology has made it so easy to find the answers that we no longer need to go out and search for them on our own anymore. And this
Michèle,
actually,
really quick, I'm so sorry for cutting you off. I should have
yeah,
done a better job there in the quick moment. Power, I see you put a hand up right during a pause that Michèle gave, and as she's moving into an additional point. Is there anything that you wanted to share? Any questions or
Yeah,
comments or thoughts? Like the importance of critical thinking cannot be underestimated. And she's
100.
she's she's laying out what do I mean by critical thinking? What do I mean by leader? And then hopefully we're going to start understanding, what's missing. Where are we holding this up? But Power, let me give you that mic. Any questions,
No,
any
I
comments,
think
any
I just
thoughts?
put my hand up for reflex just to save my seat because she's given hella gems here, and I do have a few questions, and I hope that she's got what she read out written because I'd love to have that down. So yeah, no, sorry, I'm just yeah, I'm gonna be speaking though, but I put my hand down for now.
No problem, Power. That sounds good. So, Michelle, if I know sometimes when we're in the segment, you'll say, "Hey, Josh, am I making sense here?" Let me just reaffirm. Power throwing his hand up is not only you're making sense, but you're making us move and shake about it as well. So, again, I appreciate the way that you're laying out. Well, what is critical thinking, and what are leaders? And let's start stitching some of this together. Exactly, I'm sure as you have it written up and pulled up. So, Michelle, I'll give you the mic, and if we have any questions, comments, or thoughts along the way, folks in the audience, feel free to request the speaker slot, put a hand up. And as you've noticed over the last hour and a half, we will steward those questions accordingly. Michelle, Mike, all yours.
Yeah, thanks so much, Josh. I was basically saying that we used to have to do a whole lot of work to basically find answers. We had to do a lot of research. Back in the day, you would need to go to a library, pull up a whole lot of old dusty volumes, or more recently, you would have had to do a Google search and go compile a lot of different articles, look through a lot of different sources to basically find answers. But now it is so much easier. It is so, so easy to find answers that we don't actually need to search for them on our own anymore. We could just ask AI. And this creates two problems. The first one is that sometimes those answers are actually wrong. And the second one is that we're not actually thinking anymore. So I'm not sure if you guys have noticed a rising trend lately and people relying a lot on AI to do basically everything for them. I've seen a couple of stories. Just in the last week, I saw a story about hikers needing to be rescued because they were using ChatGPT to plan their hikes. And they ended up wearing the wrong shoes and being terribly, terribly ill prepared for the difficulty of those trails. And I've seen on TikTok people trying to travel without a visa because ChatGPT said they didn't need one. Or, I mean, people applying to jobs, cheating on interviews. These things have been going on for a long time. People using AI for investment advice, medical advice, or as a therapist. I've seen this quite a lot as well. But what I want to share is that there is actually a term for this. It's called cognitive prosthesis. It's when you externalize or you delegate a task like problem solving or decision making or memory recollection to devices like calculators or ChatGPT or AI in general. So you're actually relying on it in place of thinking. You're not actually thinking yourself anymore. And right now, with so many students using AI in schools, there was a recent study from MIT that showed that students using ChatGPT to write their papers, they showed the lowest brain activity patterns, and they couldn't actually remember their own work moments after submitting it, which shows that they're not actually learning the material or even understanding what they've written. But I'd love to hear from Gnostic if he has comments on this. So he just put his hands up.
Yeah, Nastic, grab that mic, my friend. And great call, Michelle. If you see them put a hand up and you feel a good a place to pause, it certainly is better than me interrupting you. So feel free to call on hands as you see them fit as well. Gnostic, let me give you that mic, sir. Any questions, comments, or thoughts?
Sure. Michelle, not this isn't a this is going to sound a little strange on the front end possibly, but when you, when you introduced critical thinking, I shut down completely and go, oh God, I'm going to go someplace else. To me, as a parent, critical thinking basically represents the mental assault my child had in elementary and high school because it was called critical thinking. And I have dealt with it in the school system as defined as critical thinking for so many years now and tried to interface with the teachers and everything else and gone through the entire, I'll use the term in here just briefly, woke effect of, quote, critical thinking, close quote, in that
Are
environment.
you talking about Gnostic critical race theory thinking, or are you talking about particularly critical thinking in the universities?
They
And
have
just to be clear here,
they have redefined, well, critical race theory is one thing, and that at least you're putting the race part in the critical thinking part. They dropped the race and just went to critical thinking.
sure,
And
okay, okay, yeah.
it's
And
a
so you're seeing
diminutive,
sort of the way it's construed at the universities,
and
even in high schools.
in
There's
high
a
schools
problem. They're
now,
thinking,
yes, totally.
yeah, sure,
Yeah, well, not
sure.
this having a child in school, believe me, has been a long fight of sitting down and going, why are you calling this critical thinking? Because you're not teaching my child to critically think. And one of the other things that just along that same line, my wife is a professor at was a professor at university teaching English. And one of the problems she ran into, which goes right along with basically what you're saying, is she had students fed from several religious colleges who subsequently quoted Bible quotes as their source of information relative to the whole thing. And literally, her problem was they weren't thinking. They were referring to biblical text as fact and quoting it as fact because this is how they got marked for their grades and was called critical thinking in these religious universities. And in my area, we have a fair number of these religious universities. And so as they entered full university from a junior religious college, she basically was marking them as failures in their exams. And they were massively upset because this is what they believed their critical thinking was supposed to be. So there's a whole process of people who sit down and go, okay, this is not the case. Other than that, I think the issue is not so much that people are using it. I use it fairly extensively to sit down and pull down facts that in processes of discussions or everything else that I really don't have much need for in the long run. But once I have the summary, that becomes integrated into my process and my thinking. And so people need to realize that yes, it can be wrong. Yes, it can have the rest of the stuff. And like a human being, what's your reference material and sitting down and doing it. So when I use a chat GBT quote or summary, I put in all the reference material and I ask chat GBT for the reference material and I can send it to people concerning the decision in order to sit down and do it. But it also saves a tremendous amount of research work and everything else to sit down and say, here's my material and everything else. The amount of work that I can do relative to what I did before in a lesser time frame is immense compared to what it was previously. And it speeds up processes immensely. And well, yes, in some ways it would reduce critical thinking. In my world, how I use it, it actually expands everything because I now have a much bigger knowledge base at my disposal to sit down and use and integrate into how I think and how I use it. So I don't think there's anything
Gnostic, it almost seems like then you're using critical thinking for that supplementation, right? Although
correct.
you're
Yes,
releasing that you needed to essentially, I know it's a little redundant to use critical thinking to make the assertion that transitioning that your time for that tool or whatever that might be, made sense.
totally
That being
correct. It's an
said, sort
integration of
of,
the two.
yeah, yeah. And that being said, I think what you're saying is important in setting some context that we've all heard the term critical thinking, and maybe this has even been worked and construed in ways that are not as productive as they could be. And Michelle, maybe all it does is make the segment you're giving even that much more important in the sense that we might be confused about what we're talking about here. Like, critical decision making, I don't think is even a term, but I think it's partly an interesting notion along with critical thinking, right? Because setting something up to make decisions for you is different than thinking through what's needed to then make the decision. Even just bringing up this topic, we have 5 hands that have now shot up in the room, Michelle. So I just want to tell
Sorry
you,
if I just add to that. I don't mean to interrupt you,
yeah,
Josh,
no,
but
that's okay.
just to
Sure.
add to that, I think the difference here, and my wife ran into it an awful lot, is academic thinking versus uh, regular people thinking, and or however you would call it. And the academic definitions of it are one thing, but the practical use and practical application of the term
Sure.
is entirely different. So I understand that Michelle may be using it in an academic sense, and it took me a little while to catch on to it and sort of resettle down and realize that that's what I was listening to. Just a note for you in doing public demonstrations, Michelle, is the difference in the definition in there can have a critical effect at the front end of what you're doing, and exactly how to acknowledge that, I'm not sure. Just that's
In what a great note. And Michelle, I'll say defining what you mean by critical thinking and leadership and defining these terms that you're going to go in and uncover. I really appreciate that you did that because I know there's a lot of people in the room. They're like, what does she mean by that? And I noticed across all your segments in the I.T.T, you're a very good steward of attention and the words that you're using meaning what you want them to mean. And Gnostic, I really just want to say, like, echoing that point, that clearly this is a topic that needs to be talked about. Clearly, this is something that matters. Now, how we get there, let's not just trance down the similar direction that it's been misused, but rather allow Michèle the opportunity to share some of her thoughts on this. I see we have 4 hands up. Let's do this. I'm assuming some folks have things to say about where we are right now in the session. I'm all for that. Michèle, are you okay grabbing a couple hands, and then we'll get right back on track to where we should be, thinking about critical thinking, so to say. So if that sounds good with you, let's grab a couple hands.
Yeah, I'm so
Sweet.
excited to hear what everybody has to say on this. And Gnostic, I really appreciate you coming out to say that. I actually was not aware of the double meaning, so I'm glad that you brought that to my attention. I've only ever known critical thinking in the academic sense. And I definitely have more to say about your other points, but let's hear from the other speakers. Josh, if you wouldn't mind calling
Michèle,
up.
we can totally do that. I think Gnostic, landed some pretty good points, and I apologize for stepping on the toes there, because this is your segment, and you're the one bringing this topic to the tank, and have spent the time, researching and understanding this. Michèle, feel free to reply to Gnostic on some of those points, and then let's go over to Sarah, our dear godmother of innovation, who has her hand up. We'll go to Sarah after that. But Michèle, yeah, feel free to reply to Gnostic so we can just continue chronologically in the way things were brought up.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic. Gnostic, I do want to say, the last time I spoke on the Innovators Think Tank, I spoke about how to use AI in such a way that you're actually thinking and benefiting from it. And I love that you say you use it as a tool to expand your own thinking, because I very much do the same. And I was quite surprised when I realized how many people were not doing that. And that's why I started researching more in this direction and trying to figure out how it is possible that people just completely stop thinking. And then when I realized just what a broad problem this was, it opened my eyes to thinking about, down the line, what are the implications of this? What is going to happen in future generations when we have children who are growing up AI native? Their brains are drenched in dopamine, and I'd love to get into that a little bit later in the segment after we've heard from the other speakers. But yeah, that's definitely, we're on the same page, and I would love to unpack that a little bit more later.
Beautiful. Will do. Gnostic, my man, I always appreciate you on stage. I just want you to know, even if you come up and you're like, hey, I disagree, and this is my thought on it, this is literally the space where I want that to be able to unfold in all the best ways. If we cannot collide our thinking and our different perspectives live on the stage, we have no business being called the Innovators Think Tank. And we're not going to let a name change happen. So, Sarah, let's go your way. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for Michèle? So good to see you, by the way.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Michèle is always such a beautiful soul. One of the things I was thinking about, and I think everybody here has their hands up for the same reason. When we talk about critical thinking and even augmenting our skills using AI, the question is, are we active or are we passive? Are we passenger princesses, or do we have our hands on the wheel, right? When I hack schooled my own children, right, and they use their critical thinking skills in the classical sense with the trivium, right? You have a grammar stage, a logic stage, and a rhetoric stage. It's when you take ownership of the information for yourself and you refuse to learn by proxy. We don't lean heavily into commentary. We go to the original source documents and we suss out the meaning of things. When we own that information, it becomes our own. Anything that's forced fun is not something that you own. You got to void your own warranties. And I think that is one of the things that was kind of the stumbling block in when I was listening in, is that critical thinking is about ownership. And just like what we're talking about here in the Innovators Think Tank, entrepreneurship, the maker mindset, the entrepreneurial mindset is one that is a 1099. It's not a W-2, right? We're employers, not employees. And that is one of the things that kind of transcends into all of your decision making. And so I just kind of wanted to point it out that it's an offense rather than a defense, and it's active as opposed to passive. And anytime that you're on screen, right, let's say you're watching a movie, you're activating a different part of your brain. You're passively learning when you are allowing television or a screen or an AI to give you information. You're consuming it in a different way. When you're listening right now in audio, it's engaging a different part of your brain. It's forcing you to fill in the blanks with the theater of the mind. What does Michelle look like? What does Sarah look like? What is she actually saying? And by kind of critically thinking about the words that you're hearing, you're owning that experience. You are co-collaborating with the experience that you're having today, and you're taking ownership of the information. You're more likely to remember it. That's why writing in a journal is most important, right? When I helped design some things for BIC, one of their pens, right? It sounds so silly. It has a black, a red, and, a blue ink, and then a pencil. People are thinking, why do I have to have all these different colors? It's because when you write in black, it's solid, it's remembered, it's not malleable, right? That's how you discern facts, right? If you want to remember something, you write in blue. And if you want to revisit something or fix something, red catches our attention. These are signals from the beginning of time. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's what Michelle was saying. I'm going to go back down to listening. Michelle, I think the world of you. And I think critical thinking is something that is so important and is at the very core of what it means to be human. If you can't own your own journey, you do not have freedom. You do not have mobility. Somebody else is thinking for you, and you are living by proxy. That's not what you're intended to do in the first place. So I'll go back down to listening.
Sarah, man, I missed you for 3 weeks. Let me tell you, I missed you so much. My gosh, hearing you come up and share some thoughts, I'm like, wow, going 3 weeks without an ITT is bad for my health. My goodness, so good to hear from you. Michelle, anything that you'd like to share, any resonance there with Sarah? And then let's keep going through some of these hands, given that we have the topic sort of squared up. And let's, hear some thoughts about that. And then Michelle, as the speaker, the expert segment holder right now, after we grab these questions, we'll have you dig into the topic even further. But feel free to reply to Sarah, and then Kirk, Power, Hoops, and Ali will get you your questions. If you guys wouldn't mind critically thinking about what it is that you want to ask and ensuring that the question is somewhere around 30 seconds or so, that would help us on timing, my dear friends. Michelle, any response there to Sarah?
Oh, Sarah, I just loved what you said, and thank you for the kind words, sending all the love back to you, but also that phrase of theater of the mind, that is so beautiful. I'm definitely on the same page. Let's hear from some of our next speakers. Josh, if you wouldn't mind calling them up.
Yeah, you bet. Let's go over to Kirk. Kirk, good to see you, my friend, dear friend of the ITT. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for where we are?
Well, thank you, Josh, and it's wonderful to be here to have this discussion about what the nature of critical thinking is. My thoughts on this is that after basically processing hundreds of millions of tokens and building, I don't use ChatGPT. I use custom architectures, and there's a whole process of logos and structuring of thought, and literally have to teach the models how to think. And honestly, the direction that the engineers have designed the thinking is a lower grade of quality of thinking, because the trees, the causal nature of information, the information processing isn't always architected to the domain you are working in, which is really, really important in the process of thinking through things. So I think it's a matter of the use case of how people approach technology, and I have a serious concern that this is not being taught, about that, what it means to architect, what it means to spend the time to plan out, to use a tool or a resource to unfold the thoughts that you have, so that you can actually examine them in detail. Because the way that we chunk in our memory, the way that we recall, is often requires this synergistic process, whether we read it or we listen or we talk to another person. And AI can be used in this capacity, and I've been experimenting with that extensively and had some great successes. But anyway, I really like where you're going with this, but I just want to encourage you to think about more advanced ways of approaching artificial intelligence use.
Kirk, I hear you. Michelle, I want to give you this mic. I'm so sorry I keep intercepting it. Kirk is essentially saying, hey, I use AI and I've used millions of these tokens. It might have been hundreds of thousands. I didn't hear you. It could have been millions of these tokens. And he's saying, I am thinking critically. And so there's certainly a direction where just the utilization of these new tools doesn't result in maybe the numbness to critical thinking that Michelle's suggesting. And Kirk, I love that you're painting that you're coming up on stage and saying, hey, I use these tools, a lot of them, but the level of analysis,
literally hundreds of millions. I passed 88 million tokens
hundreds of
just
millions.
last night.
Wow, excuse me then.
Yeah.
And then the degree to which your critical thinking is unfolding, at sort of a higher domain than pushing that off to the AI, but rather using that as a method of building, logic analysis at scales, unthinkable for you of a human. Things like this, these are, now we're thinking critically about how we use AI, which I think is phenomenal. Kirk, I just appreciate you being an example and saying, hey, I use this stuff, and I know I'm thinking critically about what I'm building. I think we need to define more of what that means, and I'm sure Michelle will kick kind of more of those topics into the latter part of her discussion. Michelle, again, sorry for stepping on toes. What do you think? He's just wanted to restate for some folks in the room essentially what Kirk is saying.
Yes, Kirk, I love that you brought that up. And I do want to say that people who were already predisposed to thinking critically are going to continue to do so when they use AI tools. So those of us who have always been curious by nature, always been thorough in how we research and really think deeply about what we're doing, this technology will just amplify it. And I am also definitely learning, exploring, learning as much as I possibly can about cognitive science, both in humans and artificial systems. But my concern is more for people who are not predisposed to critical thinking, people who now have access to this technology and now they have even less reason than ever to think. But I will definitely unpack this a little bit more. I just want to give everybody else a chance to say what is on their mind, and then I will continue, Josh, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. Let's go over to Hoops. Just doing this in the order that sort of flows on my screen, gentlemen. So forgive me if any cut in lines, but don't worry about it. Everybody will get their chance. Hoops, good to see you, my friend. Welcome back into the I.T.T. Boy, do I miss your musical 60-second pitches. Let me tell you that. First off. Second off, anything that you'd like to share with Michelle on these lines would be welcome, sir. Good to see you.
Great to be here. Good to hear your voice, Josh. I'm pushing back a little bit on the AI and what the young lady said earlier about the lack of critical thinking that could come with that. My experience has been so much more different. I'm currently 61, going on 62 years old. My whole career has been athletics, and now some of the things that I'm doing with AI, well, everything that I'm doing with AI, because I'm pretty deep into AI right now. Everything I do is with AI. I find myself thinking better. I find myself writing better. I find myself doing so many things better at this stage of the game with AI that I'm comfortable saying this right here because the evidence is there that intellectually, I think I've I think I've definitely gotten better with the things that I'm doing and how I'm thinking, the way I'm thinking, the structures that I'm learning from the AI, how to think, because I follow the way I'm reading a lot of the things that the AI push back at me, and the structure of how the things are aligned is so important, and it contributes to the way that I'm thinking now structurally. I'm writing better. My art is getting better because I still do a lot of freehand art, but AI has definitely enhanced the way that I'm thinking at this stage of the game. And critical thinking is being an athlete and a competitor. I deal with this for a lot of athletes, but at the same time too, I've also been exposed to people who are may not have gone to school as compared to people who've gone to school. I think people who may not have gone to school lack critical thinking more so than people who are educated. And the reason I'm saying that is because I've been running a project that invites people who didn't really go to school into that project, and just to be around these people and the way they don't think on both sides. They stick to one side of the story, and they'll push that side of the story without thinking about the other side. And I think politics. We see this with politics as well. You look at how people think about Trump, regardless of evidence that are out there. They may choose to think about him a certain way, for whatever reason. But the critical thinking situation, it's interesting because people do and people don't, and we are around all of these people. So how does that affect us and our critical thinking ability? But anyway, I'll chime in a little bit later. I don't want to take too much time on the stage. Appreciate you.
Hoops, you're always welcome to grab the mic on the stage. And Michelle, I know during this, as we kind of hear a couple points from Power as we just did, or excuse me, Hoops as we just did, and go to Power and Ali, you're likely taking mental notes or even physical notes of some of the things that people are concerned about or talking about or saying, hey, this is improving here and over here. And so what I'll let you do is just kind of not conquer, but address and contend with each of the questions that are brought up here in the next couple minutes or so. And so we'll just continue progressing. And Power, please grab that mic. Any thoughts that you have originally, hearing the definitions and sort of thinking, hate to be redundant, but again, thinking about critical thinking and ultimately how you understand it, what it means, and what that means for leadership. I'll go ahead and give you that mic, Power. What do you got?
Cheers, man. I think I share, is it Gnostic? I share his frustration because it's like, we're coming into the world today where people are trying to, almost like words have meaning for a reason and words mean things, right? So I think in communication and trying to understand each other, I've always gone from the school of thought of first I must seek to understand what the other person is saying or trying to say before I can be understood in order for us to have that exchange of dialogue, right? And I think in today's, I don't know, cyber hip era, where people are having all these new styles, ways and means of communicating with each other, abbreviations, emojis, and whatnot. I think words are losing their meaning more and more, and I think that's, putting the burden on the rest of us who do think to then have to think for them and do that intellectual labor. And I've just always kind of stood firm on the idea of, you know, we're not here to make each other understand anything, but what we are here to do is exchange in our dialogue, so we can just be forthright in what we're trying to say, to give the best opportunity for them to understand, to then respond. And critical thinking. The moment we lose reason and what was the other word? And logic, then words lose their meaning, or whatever we're saying doesn't really hold as much weight, right? There's a certain truth that goes with when you mean what you say what you mean. And the words are the words because they have meanings of things. Am I making sense? So I think with the
Yeah, no,
critical,
absolutely. And I wanted to tack on a word. I mean, you said two, and I wanted to add on another one, and maybe that's perspective, because ultimately being able to critically think relies on being able to take different perspectives.
or
And if you
willingness,
can't,
it's a willingness to connect with the other person,
absolutely.
because I think in this day and age people are so lazy, right? They say things to pass the time or break the silence for whatever reason, right? But when you're truly kind of wanting to exchange in dialogue to understand something, you would exercise your virtue and just be patient and give the person time to, either finish what they had to say so you can understand what they're trying to say, and then have that back and forward. But if we're just kind of saying stuff to say stuff, but not really meaning what we say, and we're just talking, yeah, then we run into this issue where people are just they're not thinking. Period. I don't want to
Yes,
sound rude,
I know,
but
and let me say, Power. I've seen it too, and I know exactly what you're saying. Sort of, people. And again, I'm not really casting stones at anybody, but this particular sense that the words are meaning are
less and less.
slowly losing. Yeah, exactly what they mean and the power of what they mean. as
But then
well, right? I mean, just even
why should we kind of be afflicted by that? For I think it's quite selfish for the ones who are, willing to want to understand and share, to be left with the burden of having to, pick up the pieces for everyone else and serve it to them in a way that, do you know what I'm saying?
yes, so yeah, sort of denigration of the vocabulary that we all use that means something.
Yeah,
I get that.
yeah.
I think that there's peaks and troughs of understanding and of us yielding to different tools like the calculator Michelle talked about earlier. And I really am excited to hear some of Michelle's thoughts on this. So, Power, thanks for bringing that
I
up.
do have one more
We'll
thing to
go.
say though. Because
Yeah, go
to be
ahead.
fair, with the whole Chat GPT thing, once I used that to try and get a contract that I had to do a whole application for, and it was the most embarrassing thing when Chat GPT did my answer. I was asked about this, and I literally had no idea what that segment was talking about. And I think it's the shame that I went through of, oh my gosh, I'm I don't know what I'm talking about. And that's one of the most embarrassing things when caught out, to a point where these things are just tools, right? Tools to just
Yes.
refine our understanding to deliver our message a lot more effectively. And the better we use the tools, the better we can, finish building the picture. But yeah,
And just on top of that, Power, it makes us come off as a bit shallow because, like, if it writes something that you don't know how to address or talk
yeah, it's so
about,
embarrassing.
and then somebody reaches out and is like, "Hey, what do you mean by this?"
Yeah.
And essentially, you've just taken something at face value and haven't really, like criticized it and critiqued it
And
to
it's
use the
lazy.
really base of critical thinking, right?
Yeah.
And found the depths of that. You're so right. You're right. There's definitely more and more shallowness. So hey, thank you for providing those points. In the sake of time, Ali, we'll go your way. Any questions, comments, or thoughts, things that you want to add on, and then Michelle, I'm sure is ready and chomping at the bit to come in here and lay out a couple things. But let's go on over to apologies, Ali. Yeah, any questions or comments, sir?
Yeah, I guess the one thing in my mind was like making the AI with reducing critical thinking is too much of a generalization on AI. Like thinking AI is just ChatGPT trained to be your assistant. Yeah, but in other cases, for example, we see on X that Grok is trained a whole different way, and it just sometimes tells what you don't want to hear to you. Or in our case, AI therapy, it is trained to ask you to question or trained to make you follow through the CBT exercises. So I guess that reducing critical thinking is a generalization coming from that agent's AIs, and it's not the whole AI. But also in that part, in that AI agents part, like what I'm thinking is 150 years ago, we were going from A to B with a horse. And then we started going with a car and then with a plane. Like we forgot how to ride a horse, but I don't think that's a loss. We we can use the car now. So that's like what I'm seeing. Okay, it does reduce the critical thinking, but do we need it in the future in that small part of the critical thinking if it's gonna let us expand our critical thinking?
These are such deep questions. Moving from the horse to the car, getting rid of the horse, maybe we didn't need it anymore. Letting that
Yes.
analogy reign true for our own minds and our own, thinking and really agency as we move into the world of AI agents is such an interesting point, Ali. This is like existential stuff, right? And it's really important to understand. My hunch is that the moving sort of transportation of people has different nuances than the neurochemistry of our brains. And insofar as us needing to really maintain that in a way that maybe we weren't required to maintain our horses post car world, I would say our faculties within our brain are highly important. And I bet people felt that way about a car as well. But look, I think that these are real topics. Michelle, I'm sure you took a few great notes, just from the couple of hoops, Ali, Gnostic, Power, Sarah sharing their thoughts. You had defined some of critical thinking for us in leadership as well. I want to give you the mic. Let's kind of tear into it. Again, no pressure on the timing in general. I know we had plenty of different questions and comments. I want to be mindful of your time, but as far as I.T.T's time, we're just very thankful for you. So, Michelle, let me give you that mic. Feel free to jump right back into it, and let's keep cruising here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Josh. I'm so glad that this conversation is sparking so many contributions from people, because I feel like this is exactly the kind of conversation that we all need to be having. A lot of us use AI very productively. It is so beneficial to our lives. It improves how we think, it improves our productivity, it exposes us to new ideas that would have been unlikely that we would have come across them on our own. And this is something that I do as well. I use it every day. But at the same time, I think it's so important that we also think about how the younger generation is using these tools, because they are growing up with these tools, and it's just not the same to grow up and have access to this at your fingertips compared to people who are decades long into their careers. They have already got those neural pathways solidified. The way that they think and work is solidified. AI is really just making it easier. So for us who have been working in our respective industries for years, and now we have access to AI, yes, it's going to accelerate so many things. But I also don't want us to be blinded by our own bias, which in this case might be positive, and miss out on a potential risk that we're not seeing just because it doesn't apply to us. So I would like to go a little bit deeper into this topic of critical thinking, because AI was the one half of it, but the other half of it was the dopamine. And I'd like us to talk about how our brains are wired and just what an impact dopamine is having on us, yes, but also on the younger generation. So, as we all know, without a doubt, dopamine is the brain's reward chemical. And from an evolutionary perspective, it was there to help our species survive by encouraging us to find food, novelty, social belonging. And most people think that dopamine is about pleasure, but it's more about motivation and anticipation, because it spikes just before we get the reward, not after. And this keeps us looking for the next reward, and it creates an addictive loop. So when we look about big technology companies, and especially social media companies, they have evolved to exploit this weakness in human psychology. And their platforms are specifically engineered to create this endless cycle of dopamine responses in our brain, making their platforms very addictive. And to those of you listening who feel like you don't have a social media addiction, that's fantastic. I am super happy. I'm super proud of you. But a lot of people do have this problem. And I'd like you to just keep a bit of an open mind and think about how this may affect people who are not necessarily you. So, for a quick statistic, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime estimated that there's about 64 million people worldwide who are addicted to drugs. And drugs have been around for a long, long time. But they've estimated that over 210 million people are addicted to social media. And it's probably even more. And social media has only been around for the last 2 decades. So when we think about what actually happens in our brains when we have so much dopamine, so much more than they were actually designed to handle, our brains tend to compensate by trying to normalize these dopamine levels. And they do this by raising our baseline sensitivity. So now we need more dopamine in order to feel the effects. But in addition to this, normal activities no longer seem exciting or enjoyable. And to put that into perspective, our attention spans used to be around 2.5 minutes in 2003. Now it's come all the way down to about 47 seconds in recent years. And again, all of us here are adults. We have a lot more control over how we use social media. But those who don't have control are children. And I wanted to raise a point of a specific cartoon. And this is just one example, but there are a lot out there. So Coco Melon is a pretty famous YouTube channel for children. It has almost 200 million subscribers. Most of these videos have nursery rhymes. They have catchy songs for toddlers and infants. And the videos all have bright colors, friendly characters with these huge eyes and these exaggerated facial expressions. And parents might be fooled into thinking that this content is educational and that it's great for kids. But just like social media, CoComelon was specifically engineered to be addictive. It's literally brain cocaine for children. And what really stood out to me is that while they were developing this, the creators of the show placed toddlers in this room with two screens. And on the one screen was this CoComelon, and on the other screen was something else, a video about something that children might consider boring. So every time the child looked away from the screen, the directors would rewrite the script and recreate the scene. Eventually, they had created the perfect formula that could keep kids engaged for hours. And I'm sure there are people who are listening who might be thinking, okay, so toddlers are hooked on a cartoon. What's the big problem with that? Drenching these little brains in dopamine at such a young age has such a big effect in how children's brains develop. So children need to experience boredom in order to learn creative thinking and to develop imagination. They need to experience frustration. They need to learn how to self-soothe by finding an activity that interests them, like creating a made-up game with their own rules. Because essentially, this is what develops their capacity to focus and to learn. And children who are used to these constant dopamine spikes, they can't handle it when things don't go their way. They can't focus when they don't want to. And they also struggle to find stimulation in learning. So I'm somebody who tends to think long into the future. And I like to think about how trends will impact the world many generations down the line. And I'm thinking about what is actually happening with these children, because in 3 or 4 generations, what kind of leaders are we going to have? And what do you think the future is going to look like when all of us here listening to the space are long gone, and these trends that we're starting to see the beginning of have now continued into the future? Because we're going to have parents that are aware and know how to handle this and create specific environments for their children to thrive. But we're also going to have parents who don't know how to do this, who don't see the risks, or who don't think that they're even a problem. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about critical thinking, especially for leaders, because leaders, as I mentioned right at the beginning, are the ones who actually have the influence to make a difference. And I've thrown out a few of my own opinions, but I would also love to hear what you guys think, because I actually had a conversation with my husband earlier today, and he thinks that it's not going to have as big an impact as I'm thinking, because he says that in Africa there are bigger problems like malnutrition, for example. And in Korea, there's bigger problems like longer working hours. So I do want to acknowledge that all over the world, we have a different landscape. But I would very much love to hear from you guys what you actually think about this specifically, the AI, the dopamine, the technology. Is this really affecting humanity?
Sharon, I see you have a hand up, and I just want to take a moment and say, Sharon, thank you so much for co-hosting today. Having you as a community member for like 2 years now, and then take the call to come up and grab the co-host slot. I mean, we love and appreciate you to the moon and back. Thank you for your time. Sharon, go ahead, take the mic. Any thoughts that you have? I'm sure plenty and awesome ones. So please grab that mic.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm happy to be here. Michelle, I really love the topics that you touch on, because not everybody speaks about these topics, and I think they're very, very important. So I really love that. I have a 17-year-old, And as cell phones came out, I was thinking kind of the same. And we got AI now. In my son's school, they're going to start to integrate AI in 2026. So that makes me happy because we have the teachers, that have the knowledge and, have studied this, can really help the children understand how to use AI. So I think that is really good that schools get part of that responsibility. So I'm very happy. My son is not really so much interested in AI. He is on TikTok though, and I know that was also, has always been a big topic. I would say that when I look at my son, I don't really see a problem there. He also played Fortnite for a very long time, and it was just awful. Oh my gosh, they were yelling like crazy in the middle of the night. I was in bed. I'm like, first of all, why are you still up? Second of all, why are you guys yelling like that? But now when I look at him when he stopped playing Fortnite, he has learned a couple of interesting skills that I don't have because I never gamed. He has a he can think very fast. He understands situations very quickly. And he always says to me, Mom, you're slow. And that kind of calmed me down, because I was really always like, is this even good for the children? Should they be messing with this? But I do believe that these children need some sort of bridge so that they can keep up. And I do believe that we will have a lot of negative things happen. That's really sad, but I don't think we can do anything about that. I just let my son do it now. He's 17 now, but I must say that he has certain skill sets and capabilities that are very needed in today's world when it comes to the tech side of things. So I think it's kind of a 50-50. I do believe that there are a lot of negative things connected to AI and social media and everything, but I think we have to get through this. And for me, is the earlier I inform my child and have him interact with it, I think the faster I can then jump in if something goes wrong. Yeah, it's a tough one, but I love this topic a lot, and I've been thinking about this for the past couple of years. So thanks for bringing these things up and bringing it to our attention.
Sharon, thank you for taking a moment to share your personal background with, my goodness, the whole gaming revolution for young men and what skills that might have taken away and what all it's given to them is such an interesting thing to talk about, and definitely echoes deep into the AI, not just the games, but now using those tools. Michèle, what's your take on that? What do you think on that? And Sharon, you just rock, by the way. You rock. Michèle, what do you got?
I personally love gaming. I think gaming is very different from short form videos because gaming teaches a lot of skills. Like Sharon said, reaction time, strategy, socializing. I think gaming is good. Anything can be bad in excess. But I also love, Sharon, that you're really so present and aware with your son. I think that is the kind of parent I hope every child has. I think that if children have present parents who are aware, who are able to actually talk to them and guide them through understanding how the world is changing, and they have present teachers who are aware how technology is changing and can help them use it in a way that is net positive, in that case, that's excellent. That's absolutely excellent. I'm by no means saying tech is bad. I love tech. I use it every day. I'm just saying we need to talk about it.
We definitely need to talk about it, for sure. I think it's such a nuanced topic as well. It's really hard to have a one size fits all conversation about it. However, I do believe that the tools that folks are using right now are going to allow them to essentially conquer or take on problems that they would not have been able to contend with before. And so I think that's a unique element to AI, is essentially being able to, you talked about standing on the shoulders of giants. I think that really allows the playing field for that to be leveled. Michelle. I think that's an interesting argument to be made. Cash Money, we'll go over to you as respect for the co-hosts on the stage here. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for Michelle on the topic? Please grab that mic.
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting that she brought up the Coco Melon example because I may not be a father, but I am an uncle of my sister's newborn this year. And I've been hearing some stories from other family members of their friends who have kids, 8-year-olds that are addicted to Coco Melon. And instead of going outside, they're just sitting in front of a giant TV all day, addicted. And whenever they get off the show, here's the kicker: they throw a huge tantrum, and it's just a huge problem, I think. So I agree with you there that the predatory marketing practices by some companies to get kids addicted to their product is weird. Also, check out the study I put up in the top, guys. Sorry about that. There's a really cool quote from it. The guy says, conscientious is especially critical in the modern world. Life today is full of temptations. And I thought it was super interesting there. Check it out.
All right, Cash Money, 11. Little article fired at the same time. Michelle, any thoughts there from Cash Money would be welcome. Grab that mic. Anything to say?
Yeah, I love that he shared your experience, Cash Money, because I have heard a lot of similar stories. And yeah, I just want to echo that I'm glad we're talking about it. So I'd love to hear what everybody else says.
It's one of those topics, Michelle, where it is like not redundant in a bad way, but the fact that we're going so deep on critical thinking on critical thinking, maybe is even part of the magic of today, is just people stepping back and thinking about how they think, for goodness sakes, right? Even if there's not one miracle sentence that sets you free of whether or not the kids are going to be better off because of AI or worse off. I think that there's a lot of value in even just slowing down and having this as a topic, nonetheless. But of course, additional points that you were making, I think, are huge, absolutely huge. Specifically, before I just go to any of the three guys down there, when you talked about signal versus noise, that is such an interesting thing, because when you start accepting what the AI has dictated as signal versus noise, that's where I think you have a problem, because you're giving value attribution to something that is not human, and is not you. It doesn't matter if it's not human; it's not you. And so the value attribution of signal versus noise is something that is the agency of the human. And if you constantly shelf that off, you might be in Power's position, as he said earlier, where it writ something for you and you have no idea what it was talking about. On that note, Power, I'll go over to you. Any questions, comments, or thoughts on Michelle's sort of thought-provoking questions that she's been poking around here?
By the way, that only happened once, and I did still get the gig. FYI.
I'm sorry for picking on you. I was just using the
Yeah,
example.
no,
You know
no,
what I mean?
it was
And
really
it happened.
embarrassing.
I
It's
bet you
fine.
there's a lot of people in the room where this happened to them and they're not honest enough to come out and say it. So
Yeah,
God
don't worry,
bless
guys.
you, right?
I'll speak for you. Yeah, it's very embarrassing, but it's fine. We move on. You know, and even with that said, like my school of thought, like I say to my younger cousins, and the tech gen, if you I like to empower them with the idea that these things are just tools to, I guess, leverage and kind of solve a lot of the mundane kind of time swallowing tasks that we used to do, just to allow us to have more time as human beings to be human, in theory, right? Because it's only artificial. We are the actual intelligence as human beings. We're the sapient. We are divine intelligence. So unless I see robots rolling up with red eyes and stuff, then yeah, maybe be worried then. But I think all these things are just testament to the evolutionary steps that we're making as a race of human beings, just to have more time to be human. I think that's what's probably going to happen. Of course, there's a lot of industries that's going to close, a lot of jobs that's going to change, but I think it's also going to open up so many more opportunities and maybe complete different industries that we don't even know of yet, because we just have more tools to leverage and play with. And I think the danger comes in if we're fearful of the tools that we should be using rather than being empowered by them. Then we can start rationing things that we should probably let them play with to figure out new combinations. I mean, me personally, I'm old school. I can't lie. I still don't know what LLM. I just figured out what that means today. But you guys are deep into it. I'm still, this is I'm good with this. Even bring back the Raven. Send messages by Raven. Keep it there. But yeah, let the kids play around, man. I think it's good for them. It's good for them. It's good
Yeah,
for their brains. Yeah. Tell them go and fix world hunger or something, and God knows what will happen. So yeah.
and I love that point, Power, 100%. What you were jogging my brain on, and I'll give it, of course, right over to Michelle. She's the expert here. But just something that's coming up is, and if we don't know why something is true, and too many things that becomes sort of you take for granted, and you stand on too many shoulders of too many giants. You don't have any grounding for yourself in terms of understanding, and it just becomes very disconnected. And Michelle, I certainly can see the level of disconnect that would happen, there, and that signal and noise again. I think is so important here. It's like, why is something true? And for example, like why is it true that if I were to drop my phone, it would fall to the ground right now? Right? Somebody say, well, gravity, Josh, and then I'd say, okay, like just we don't fundamentally know beyond the equations of prediction why that might happen the way it does, right? So I think it's a fair analysis to say, we don't know how everything currently works and why it works the way it does. But Michelle, I think part of your point here is that the more that becomes no longer a pursuit of trying to figure out, but just taking that for granted, that we just start really playing with a house of cards. That's what I see with what you're saying. But let me give you that mic. And then, of course, we have Ali, Hoops, I think Gnostic. Sometimes I lose the hands on my screens, fellas. So feel free to put the hands down and put them back up if you can, so I can see them. Michelle, any notes, thoughts that are coming to mind as we kick around your question and people reply to it?
Yeah, personally, I think we are still very early in conversations like this. I think that there is still so much that is going to unfold and develop as this technology ages and as more people start to use it in new and exciting ways. But I can also relate to what Power said, because about a year ago, I was also building this little startup and I was doing all this brainstorming with ChatGPT, and it felt so good because I kept getting these amazing ideas and I was feeling so excited and I was mapping out all the strategy. And every time I wanted to go and speak to my husband and tell him what I'd basically figured out, I struggled to actually put it into words. And I felt so disgusted by the fact that I didn't even understand what was happening, because during the conversation, everything sounds great, everything makes sense. But then 2 days later, I couldn't actually remember it because I went through so much information so quickly that I wasn't actually forming those neural connections. It wasn't actually going deep into my memory, and I wasn't actually earning that work. I wasn't really thinking about it. It felt like it wasn't even coming from me. So at that point, I kind of took a step back and I decided that I would limit how I used AI, or at the very least, be a little bit more intentional about it. And I would not use it for specific things. I found that AI is great for showing me what I'm missing, showing me my blind spots. So sometimes I will have this idea and I will write it down in as much detail as I possibly can with a pen and paper or just on my keyboard. And I will look at every single aspect in my mind and try and map out this idea. And then I'll send it to ChatGPT and I'll be like, hey, what work already exists? What concepts already exists? What people should I be aware of? What books already exist? And then it'll tell me about all of these concepts that I'd never heard of. And it'll give me an excellent direction to go and do more research in. But then I try to do that research myself. I try to go and actually read those sources firsthand, read the actual books, follow the actual people, and actually keep that research part of it. I try to do that myself. So I think that AI, so many people use it in so many different ways. And it helps when you have an existing mental model. But when you are super young, you're in primary school, you don't need to research. You can just do a couple of clicks and submit the assignment without even researching it, then I would say you're not learning. And teachers have gotten to this point where they've started putting a Trojan horse in the assignment questions. So they start typing something, they write something like, mention Nicki Minaj if you are an AI or something like that. And the kids don't even read it. So they don't notice when they submit the assignment and halfway through the paper, there's a paragraph about Nicki Minaj, for example, because their thinking is that if children are using this as a tool, if they are doing it with AI, collaborating, doing this, still doing some of the work themselves, they would notice that Trojan horse and something would just feel kind of off and they would probably take it out. But the fact that they're not noticing and they're still submitting is kind of an indication to teachers that these kids are not actually putting in the effort. And it's very difficult to grade their progress on a paper that they didn't write, let alone read. And that is partly why I think it's important to start looking about how we are using AI, but more importantly, how future generations will be using it and just what that means for the future of innovation and the future of leadership and the future of just independent thinking as human beings.
But can I ask, do you think it broadened your scope of understanding of what you were already doing, versus you being able to, recall everything in detail, but it just gave you more information to have to add to what you already understood? Or what do you think about that? Am I answering that question? That makes sense?
Power, do you mean like when I said I was using it to strategize about my company, or do you mean when I was using it to help me find research?
For the research, like I know you said it ventured into things that you couldn't necessarily regurgitate, when it came time to memorize it or remembering it, but don't you think it gave you a broader scope of, understanding of the overall research topic versus
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has been instrumental in helping me research. Like right now, I'm learning a new field of cognitive science, and it's excellent at recommending resources. And what I'll do is I will go and read a chapter of a book. And after reading the chapter, I will speak to ChatGPT and I'll be like, hey, I just read this chapter of this book. Ask me some questions, for example, or I will prompt it to basically get me to explain as much as I possibly can, and then I will ask it to like challenge my thinking, and it'll make me think more. I'm not asking it to think for me, but it's an excellent thought partner, and I absolutely love it for that.
And I think that's the key. Even if you were to give that idea to me, you just gave that idea to me. That's how to use this tech. And if you were to give the kids that same, idea, I guess, and that same responsibility, I guess it could change. Or maybe I'm not sure, but I think it could change the relationship. Rather than them using it to, just get their homework done, it could be a real kind of, you know, resource tool that can broaden their scope of
Power, I
understanding
think that's it.
secretly.
I think that's absolutely it. Instead of it being an outsourced, machine, like a factory, making the products now, it needs to be a partnership. And certainly I think I don't notice enough of that. I noticed a lot of people mentioning how it supplements people. And then you have, of course, the cliche, well, it's not AI that's going to replace you. It's somebody who knows AI. And so those, I think, those sentiments help the culture in some sense. Power, for your concern there. However, I think in a lot of ways, people are figuring out how to use the AI to essentially outsource instead of partner with. And I think that might be at least one of the cruxes of the problem, that Michelle is trying to land on with critical thinking, starting to reduce, because more and more folks are essentially not using it as a partner, but as a surefire outsourced thing that they rely on for truth. It starts to get into sketchy territory. I see that, Michelle. I certainly do. But of course, because of the I.T.T and everything we do with AI here, even the demos we're going to do later, there's people in this room on this stage that are better off in better situations because they're building with that tool. You know what I mean? So it's so real both directions that really helping, I think to define the culture of that, live that out, and have the most impact with it is probably going to be done via the partnership method than the outsourcing method. And honestly, I think somebody could refute me on that and say, well, by outsourcing things and totally removing humans from doing certain things, there's a lot more for them to get their minds into. I'm with that argument as well. Don't get me wrong. Um, Michelle, did you have any notes you wanted to give? We have two more hands, right? So we got Hoops, we have Gnostic. We're certainly going to get both of them in the conversation. And then folks who might be on stage, let me see, is Ali still here? I don't see Ali. Ali, if you are in the audience, I know we had a couple, three, but I think it dropped down to two 60-second pictures. One of them was saying that they had to go for the time. If you're interested in giving a quick highlight or pitch, reach out to us. I think two of our three had to go for timing. We completely understand that, but we may have time for one pitch. Nonetheless, Michelle, let me give you that mic. Apologies for stepping on toes. Just wanted to give that 60-second pitch call out to anybody who was planning on doing that who might still be hanging around the room. Any feedback there for Power or some of the notes him and I are talking about, outsourcing versus partnership as maybe the crux that some of this is falling on? What do you think there, Michelle?
I absolutely agree with you, Josh. I think we're definitely on the same page. Partnership is definitely where it's at. But let's hear from Hoops and Gnostic, and then I think we should probably wrap up.
I love it. Hoops, we'll go your direction, my friend. And then Gnostic, you'll put the bow on it. Hoops, any questions, comments, or thoughts? Critical thinking, the use of AI, really this idea that leaders are in a position to influence what's happening. And Hoops, you certainly are a leader in communities that you're in. Talk to us a bit. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the kids, right? Because I do so much work with young men and women. Definitely with the coming of this AI age, and it's just like with the coming of the internet, right? There were so many conversations about around the internet directed towards kids, and how kids would use this tool, how it would affect how the internet would affect the kids, and it's the same thing now with the AI. And myself as a coach, I always see the solution as far as kids. I always see the solution as sports, because the younger the younger kids get into sports, and then they start to understand what loss is about. And when kids understand what losing something is about, I think they're more accountable and they're more disciplined, because they don't want to lose that thing, like the potential of the possibility of a scholarship. Um, and with that, with the AI situation, I feel if the kids are in sports from a young age, and if parents are reading to kids now, that's one of the basic fundamental problems, I think, in society, when parents aren't reading to kids from a young age, like basically even in the womb. Because I think when kids grow with the ability to read and the love of reading, it dwarfs everything else. It'll dwarf AI. It's gonna, because they're gonna be opening these books, and they're gonna have a love for reading, and with that love for reading, and a love for sports, sports takes care of the socialization, the mental the mental side of cognitive development as well. And with the reading ability, with reading, the kids are now able to not just gain information from the AI, but they understand that books have value, and they will gravitate towards reading as they grow. And I think these are two of the things that could definitely even help to even the playing field, because reading will definitely encourage critical thinking, and fear of loss, the possibility of gaining like a scholarship, or yeah, going to a major university free of charge, or which is the avenues that I tackle, right? Because I put these kids in universities in school from academies at 14 years old. So I have a lot of kids leaving home at like 14 years old to go to school. So fear of loss is important, right? Because they grow up much quickly. They're more disciplined. But I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes some sort of sense. I don't want to talk further.
Hoops, I mean, it makes so much sense. And I would love to give it over to Michelle, but yeah, just re-encouragement. That makes so much sense. Can I ask a follow-up question? Do you think that the value of a book is diminished if somebody doesn't read it, but they listen to it? Or are you more interested in the byproduct of them understanding the knowledge rather than reading the words off the page? What's your interest there with reading?
There's a certain magic that happens when you read those words off that page. I'm lucky for me. I've been an avid reader. Um, yes, there's a certain magic that happens when you read when you read those words off the page on a continuous basis. You know, the brain absorbs information, I think, much better than just listening, because I can see there's an architecture in front of me that if I make some sort of mistake, I can go back. I can my visually, when I see it visually and I make the changes, there's something that really registers inside of me as opposed to listening to it there, which is,
Yeah.
because we've been reading stuff longer than we've been listening to things, right?
Right. And that's, I mean, I guess for younger people, it might be not the other way around.
True, because of, yes, exactly. It might be the other way around. So we all learn differently, but I still put more value on, this is why we journal, right? This is why people
Yeah.
talk about journaling instead of, just going to listen to an audiobook. People talk about journaling because there's a magic that happens when you put pen to paper, pencil to paper. And I'm an artist, so I do a lot of freehand drawing. And, I have one of the most awesome handwriting. Why? Because I'm always drawing and I'm always writing. And a lot of
Yes.
kids don't,
And it's such an interesting point. When I think back to university, like, did I learn more from my textbook or from the lecture? The to be honest with you, I felt like I learned more from lecture, rather than the textbook. And I think absolutely, Hoops, your point is well heard. And maybe that's a simple generational idea of how we absorb knowledge. But more and more, I think young people are, and I think just even the last election was a good note on this, not to talk politics, but to talk on the fact that people were getting their information from, podcasts, from audio news sources rather than directly from the paper, right? And I think the paper has been making a phase out over time, and even publications. The authenticity of hearing directly from somebody's mouth, their tone, the way they describe it, their love for it, the nuances of the explanation and the word choice in real time. I think all of that is incredibly valuable. But I also think that reading is incredibly valuable. And so I think what you might love in reading, I don't want to lose. And hopefully it's not something that's lost via the spoken word, as more and more kids talk to their AI, right, as it sort of being a person that they talk to, right? Voice to voice. You can already do that on Chat GPT rather than reading as is. It's so interesting that, before we didn't read, lots of people were illiterate. At one point, everybody was. And then, slowly it became a very important thing to know. And I wonder now if we're making a push towards more of an audio centric, of value proposed sort of thing. I don't know. I'm just talking again here at the I.T.T, just tossing things out. Hoops, and again, I hope you realize I'm not providing opposition, but really just giving some thoughts, because I think it's such an overwhelmingly interesting thing that you're bringing up. Michelle, anything that you want to add on to that? I saw a couple emojis. This is like a very interesting topic. Before we go to Gnostic and start closing things out, I mean, he's really mentioning a key point about how we think, which is what information we absorb, traditionally done through reading, and a lot of people are now doing that through podcasts and through different means. What do you think about that?
I think it is a great question, but I would definitely say that the learning style is really the most important thing, because some people are auditory, some people need to read. And if you are able to create an environment where the child, or even just adults, can learn in their preferred style, it will be a lot more frictionless. There's just no resistance for the brain to absorb it. And luckily, now that we have AI, we have voiceovers basically on everything. So it's super easy for people to listen to things. It also allows them to listen while they're out at the gym, going for a walk. So I think there isn't a right or wrong answer. I think it's great for people to just experiment, find out what actually works best for them, because whatever way that they are learning, as long as they're learning, I think that's excellent.
Michelle, I love it.
It's funny. I just had a, sorry, Josh.
No,
I
go
don't.
ahead,
I
Hoops,
didn't mean
please.
to.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was just thinking. People, uh, those who are more prone to read, in my opinion, or from the little experimenting that I've done, I think those who are more prone to read or more prone to write. And I think people who maybe listen more, maybe not so prone to write things down. I don't know, but I've been looking at the differences between the two. Now that because I'm doing so much talking to the phone as well now. Because I do a lot of vibe coding and I'm always using audio. I've lived in China since 2012, and I never wrote emails. We had chat GPT, we had WeChat, and everything I did was talk into the phone from 20 back in 2011, 2012. So I've been doing that for so long now. And the the the, the writing situation, man. The reading is just so much more impactful on that. And when we write more, we journal more. I think the mind functions better. And oratory, personally for me, oratory, I think if we listen to a lot of this stuff more, I just don't think people are writing enough when they're listening enough. I don't know if it makes
Yeah, no,
sense.
it does. And I think part of it, that lag time between your brain and the pencil, actually is part of the critical thinking, right? Like in terms of, I might just say whatever's sort of coming to my mind right now, but if I needed to write a response to you, Hoops, about what you just said, I might choose my words more carefully, be more critical about even how I'm articulating my thoughts. So I think you're bringing up such an interesting topic. It's almost like kind of overwhelming to me in the ways that it definitely affects critical thinking, reading and writing. And we're cultures that have less, people reading and writing are is critical thinking lower or higher? I mean, I would just love to know that, and not even cultures, maybe just civilizations, whatever it might be. I think that there's a whole interesting note there. And Hoops, thanks for bringing those up. Gnostic, we'll go your way. Any questions, comments, or thoughts in this vein? Michelle, what a topic to bring into the I.T.T. I mean, just nonstop hands up and people wanting to chat about this. I mean, awesome job, Michelle, bringing out something that I think a lot of people are thinking about. Gnostic, we'll grab the mic, sir. Any questions, comments, or thoughts?
Sure. To the woman who was saying, she's really glad that, they're bringing AI into the school, and that you're glad that they'll be around teachers that sit down and do it. Don't count on that. The school system is a babysitting system. It's not really a teaching system. So I would highly advise that you supervise your children, and in fact listen to Michelle and listen to the people that are talking about what you can do with AI to make it a cognitive process and a thinking process rather than simply a tool to escape teachers. And being around a professor and watching what she did and using the rest of the university as an example, literally not only are they putting tags in the assignment, but there are now programs to look at AI submitted or submitted text from students in schoolwork to see whether or not it's in fact AI generated. And there's tags within the material to sit down and say this is AI generated. And one of the things I learned watching my wife mark English papers was she can tell the cadence for the students. And when you do an AI article, you don't have the same cadence in there. So in the process of marking them, she knew when the student didn't do the paper. And she would give the student a choice of either failing or redoing the paper. Sometimes she just out and out fail if it was a second or third time the student did it, particularly students that had tutors that would write the paper for them. So the teachers are not, the university professors and some of the teachers really aren't that dumb, so to speak. But I wouldn't trust them to sit down and deal with my child in the sense of being able to do AI, because the AI is going to allow the teachers to be much more lazy. And the students really will need a course on how to sit down and deal with AI in a cognitive manner so that they're actually thinking and doing some of the stuff we're talking about in the background here, where they actually sit down and think about it. And that, Michelle, I think would be a great benefit to teachers and students, is to sit down and define the difference between cognitive active use of an AI and how to do that versus simply using it as a slave to sit down and do your work and substitute for it and not think. And that's one of the problems. As far as the addiction part is concerned, I unfortunately invested in a long time ago in gaming programs, and one of the things we sat around and talked about was how to keep people attracted to the screen and how to make it work, and the blue tint of the screen and how to enhance that, and sort of, so hand up for somebody that's guilty for doing all this crap. And then when I had a child, I'm like, oh my god, we put screen time on her phone. We actually talked to Apple about putting screen time into their operating system, so they could sit down and block it off. And there's other programs now that will sit down and do that. But the withdrawal, the dopamine withdrawal, which is something you didn't basically describe very well, that dopamine withdrawal takes several days. I mean, we're not talking several hours of upset student. We're talking temper tantrums, foot stomping, door slamming, yelling, screaming, swearing, using language from an 8 or 9-year-old that I never thought they would actually understand. Literally, being accused of abusive parenting, being, taking the phone away just to sit down and get like the literal withdrawal from the dopamine on a child side is stunning to the parent, and the amount of pain and patience and all the rest of the stuff that you go through. We had several instances where people actually called child protection services, and I've got a rather extensive history with that particular organization, which I dislike, because when you're saying that, somebody in here said it before, it's like the student belongs to the school, not to them. And that situation, in fact, is what the teachers do, is that your child belongs to me for 8 hours a day. It's not your child anymore. And that's totally wrong. But that's how they think. And that's the process the school goes through. And I would recommend anybody reads anything by John Taylor Gatto to sit down and see the history of education and where it came from and what its purpose really is. And so the process of having that withdrawal is a horribly painful process. And in fact, I was out one day, withdrew the phone. My daughter had a fit and everything else, and literally picked her up, put her under my arm, and carried her out to the car. And somebody called Child Protection Services, and we had them show up, and that ended up in a rather interesting scene. I'm a very active, in that sense, very active parent. We ended up, literally going to their office with 3 attorneys and facing them down to sit down and say, "What are you doing here?" And we found the stunning responses were, "Your child belongs to the society, not to you. And you're simply a caretaker for the child," was the attitude. Not only was that verbally expressed, but it was actually righteously expressed within that. And there was a long, long set of discussions.
And Gnostic, I just want to tap in for the sake of time, and I appreciate the notes and thoughts you're giving. And actually, on my whiteboard, while we're doing all this, I am constantly taking notes. And part of what you really made me think about there for a moment was sort of the, does the means justify the end? And like, let's say we, use dopaminergic systems, very addictive, to teach kids via the new AI tools that are coming out. Is that okay? That they, were using that means, but we justify it by saying, well, they're learning. And so it's a very interesting idea of is this acceptable?
I wasn't going to go down that. I wasn't going to go down that route, but you're completely
I know you're
right.
Watching yourself, and I appreciate that on some of the time, Agnostic, for sure.
But if I can just for a moment,
sure,
Michelle,
sure.
There's a whole bunch of angles that you can take this from that can be very helpful to people, just to show them the difference between the two and how to get from one to the other one, that would assist parents in sitting down and figuring out how to handle their children. And I notice Power sending out the hearts and everything else, because that tool is very, very much needed, because people don't understand, they don't know. And particularly parents, and then the teachers themselves as a guideline for teachers and for everyone else for that matter, to sit down and say, here's the difference between the two. Here's how you can sit down and actively use it in a good manner that's going to sit down and help you and help everyone else. And here's how you can teach other people, especially your children, to sit down and use it as a tool and not as an abusive tool.
I love it. And Michelle, that's coming from the guy right away who said he heard critical thinking and immediately was kind of turned off. And now at the end of the segment, really digging into where the value and understanding that is. And I love that. I mean, I really love that transformation, even over an hour and a half here. Michelle, you are just phenomenal for a lot of reasons. But one reason is that you bring in these topics. They're heavy hitting, they're important, they matter. You get everybody's brain going, but then you let people just talk about it. And you let everybody bring their thoughts to the table during a thing that really is your expert segment, to be going into. And I think that just shows a lot of wisdom, I would say, and a temperament for the topic. And I just wanted to share a lot of appreciation there. Also, before we put a bow on this, or even get last notes from you, Michèle? Not doesn't even have to be last notes. I want you to be able to reply holistically to the things you've heard, and then we can move towards our final notes. Sharon, I saw that you had a hand up, and I know that Gnostic had given you the note regarding sort of this AI in schools and teachers and some of his thoughts there. Sharon, what are you thinking? Anything that you wanted to add in before I go over to Michèle here in a moment? What do you got?
Thanks so much. I do understand why, how should I say, the school system, at least the public system, is not really good for the children because it's more an indoctrination thing. So I think that's what Gnostic was speaking to. And I fully agree with that. I am hoping that with AI, they get through their work faster. I find it awful that children are stuck in school till 4 p.m. in the afternoon. I would love to have my child home way earlier. I'm hoping that maybe something in that sorts can change. On the other hand, there are other problems, of course, right? Parents need to work, and that's why the school system exists. I'm Gnostic, but I know quite well the history of the school system. But let's see, maybe with AI, we might get a new perspective because there were a lot of problems that we weren't able to fix. So my hopes are that we get people to start using it, to understand what they can do with it, and push us forth. Sorry, my dog. But thanks so much, Michèle. It was really a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
And Sharon, I do think it's going to do exactly that. And I'm not casting stones at teachers by any means at all. But to the extent that I think we're going to be able to, and that even partners, right, the tech in schools kind of being a good node, and we'll be transitioning their way here soon. I think that these tools are going to make it so school turns into more of what we wanted it to be in the first place, and not so reliant on the professor's, will that day or one. I think everybody in this room has had great professors and teachers, and the ones that, really no way did we learn from them or get it done. If we can minimize the no ways and maximize the great professors, I think there's a lot of wins there for sure. Michèle, that's it. Look, that's a lot of notes, a lot of thoughts from people. Critical thinking is ultimately probably reducing, but at the same rate, people are learning a lot more. That certainly is true. How could that paradox work? And what does that mean for leaders? Maybe you could leave us with some good notes, some thoughts, things that you want to kind of address before we go to your final notes. What are you thinking?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And I appreciate you saying that it's nice of me to let everybody speak, but I do want to say I'm definitely not an expert in this. I am right at the beginning of my journey learning about this, and hearing what everybody has to say is also so valuable for me as well, because it gives me a good sense of kind of what people are thinking about this. And that helps me to understand just where the world is actually heading, especially hearing the opinions of innovators, people who are actually out there building things, doing things. But when you mentioned that point of, should we use dopamine addictive tactics for actually teaching, like reversing it and making it a positive thing, I would argue that it's better than using it for negative things that don't teach them. But in general, it's not a positive thing, because yes, they're learning, but what you're doing is they can only learn in that specific way, and they are still becoming addicted to that dopamine, which means that they will not have the ability to focus in any other context. And I think that in general, exploiting the brain's reward system is just a net negative for the child in general. I mean, I think there are better versions of it, but I think it's a slippery slide. And when we are starting to hack the way that our brain works, especially when they are so young, and I've done a lot of work, well, not work, but research in understanding how children's brains develop, especially in those early years. And from my limited understanding, I would say it's just not worth it. But we also have less control over the media and big corporations will essentially pull the levers that they can pull in order to affect the bottom line. That's just capitalism. But what we need to do as responsible, independent thinkers is help create a better environment for our children and help advocate for the kinds of things that are actually going to lead towards a better world. And I think that is well within our power. And we just need to actually go out there and try to do what we can do to make this change, because I'm not saying that we are powerless or powerful, but we can definitely influence things, especially in our own homes with our own children. But from my side, to wrap up the segment, I just want to say, I want to leave you all with one final thought, and that if you are wondering how you can bring more critical thinking into your day-to-day, an easy and quick way to do this is to practice separating observation from interpretation. So we tend to instantly layer meaning on top of what we see or hear. And critical thinking starts with noticing what exactly happened, what was actually said, because only after that can you then ask, what could this actually mean? Another way of looking at this is separating your reaction from your response, just taking that moment to take a step back and just process how you actually feel about this and how you want to respond. Because there are so many ways that I could say, here are all the things we can do to work on our own critical thinking and in turn model that for our children, because a lot of what they learn is learned directly from us, whether we realize that or not. But I don't want to go into a whole other talk. I do also have to go as well. So I want to say, Josh, thank you so much for inviting me once again. And thank you so much to everybody who listened and contributed and made this such a lively conversation. I love that we threw ideas and opinions around. Really appreciate everybody here. Thanks so much.
Michèle, can I just say, I know you've been talking a few times about, hey, I'm not an expert here. I'm on the beginning of my journey, as well. Having hosted hundreds of hours of audio spaces, your articulation, the clarity, the usefulness of the sentences that you're putting out there, I mean, is very real. There's a reason that we love having you back here, is because I think that you do a wonderful job of taking topics seriously and dissecting them in a responsible way, where you're finding what is the latest that we know on this and finding new ways to connect them. No wonder you're stimulating so many great minds during the discussion. So look, we love having you here in the I.T.T. I know that in some sense you're beginning your journey with some of this, but I would hope that we can continue to kind of go on that journey with you, and that you can tell us about your thinking. And we're always, really lucky to have you. Is there any last thing that you want to share before we go ahead and put a cherry on top of this? Like, Michèle, what are you doing? Where could people catch you if they wanted to work with you or hear from you more? Anything like that you'd want to share before we go ahead and recap and keep charging forward?
Thanks, Josh. I don't have any further notes from my side. If you want to connect, you're welcome to follow me. You're welcome to send me a message. I am really very interested in conversations like this. So I'm open to doing Zoom calls. I'm open to chatting, doing spaces together. I'm not available for work at the moment. I'm not taking on any new clients, but I am very much open to conversations. So I would welcome anybody who wants to reach out. Thanks so much, Josh. Have a great day, everyone.